Okay. Hi, everybody. BJ Miller, palliative care doctor. I'm here in follow-up answering a few more questions that came in after our last webinar on communication. So with that, over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, BJ. All right, first question is, I have been trying to get a friend to accept the coming death of his mother, but he won't engage with the word or discuss it with me or her. I'm sad because I feel that his mother is missing out on important work at the end of her life, but I don't want to push too hard. At what point do I stop trying to sway him?
Oh, complicated question. Important question and complicated. So it depends, I suppose, so much. It depends on your role in this situation. So as a close-in family member, or very close friend, and by close in, I mean either officially involved as the healthcare proxy or somehow involved in decision making and support and sort of the day to day. So in other words, if you're close in on the personal level, well, that generally comes with a different level of intimacy and trust. And so it may make sense in that purview to try to sit with the son and just simply say as directly as you did in this question, simply say, I know I'm a little bit more removed from the situation, so I have a different line of sight, and but I'm worried that there's some issues that are going unspoken, unaddressed, because we're just not able or willing to look at the big picture. And I love to look at the big picture with you because I do think there's some things to be done. I think there's some relief in the mix, and I think some creative work to be done from where I sit. Something like that. Um, if, however, you are in this mix as a professional, social worker, nurse, chaplain, doctor, well, that context begs for slightly different dynamics. So, if in a professional setting, depending on your role, if you know this family very closely, if you're deeply involved, well, then there again, there is a pathway for trust and pushing the conversation. Um, but oftentimes that trust just takes a long time, longer than we have in the clinical side to establish, to really push someone without actually doing harm. So check yourself, check your role, check the context. From the professional point of view, I think really all we can do, because there's inborn deference here to the patient and their family, there needs to be. So no matter what we're projecting on the situation, what we see as possible as professionals in this mix, that doesn't mean the family is able or willing or wanting to get to that stuff that we see as being good or possible. So you have to have this very therapeutic relationship. If you can talk to the son, hey, what are your hopes now? What are your goals for your mom here? What would you hope to see happen? What are your concerns? If you can get to that conversation, well, then you can open it up. And then if the son says, well, I just want mom to have the best quality of life possible and, live as long as possible, but not suffer, well, then there's an entree to say, okay, well, in that vein, um, I think there are a few things here I'm seeing that we could work towards, and then go from there. Um, but, if you've tried that once or twice with this son and he's just not willing to go there, I would back off. We can only go so far and people can only take so much. And the problem is if you continue to push, you're going to just elicit defenses at some point. And then people are just digging in, defending a position, not necessarily able to listen or wanting to listen to someone from the outside. So this is where part of the job is, doing your best, offering up options and possibilities and support, but ultimately it's their life, their death, and they may not want to go the way where you want to go, and their opinion really, if push comes to shove, wins. You know, so again, the answer to your question really matters on the context and on the role. And then the last comment is, and no matter what your role, I would say push to a certain degree, give opportunity to change, say your piece, but then you kind of have to back off to keep out of the defenses. Sometimes people, you sort of set a seed and a week or two may go by and the son on his own time, on his own terms, might come to see the wisdom of what you're trying to point to. Sometimes it just takes some marinating, some time to stew on this subconsciously and otherwise. And then really my last point here is, if it's the mom's life that we're concerned about and so directly here, well, obviously, or maybe not so obvious, we should talk to the mom. No matter what the son is doing, if the mom is able to and interested in engaging around her own health, well, then speaking directly with mom about her hopes and dreams and wishes and fears about heading towards the end of her life and what's important to her and what would she like to work on. So there you go. Hopefully, it's a complicated question. Therefore, the answer is pretty complicated and convoluted and contingent on some facts. But I hope somewhere in that array is a useful answer for you.
Okay. Next question is about time. What are your thoughts around time being the limiting factor in communication, i.e., opening up the conversation around a provocative subject, knowing that there may be no immediate resolution?
Mm. I'm assuming from the question that there may not be no immediate resolution because there's not time to finish the conversation. In other words, is
That's
the
how I
question
read
sort of
it. Mhm.
okay? So the question I suppose gets at how to work within limited time chunks, which on the professional side happens all the time. We get these little appointment slots and try to pack so much into them. So there's a common issue if you're working against the clock. Um, so you said something in your question which is really important. If you know you've only got 15 minutes with this person, whatever it is, half hour, whatever it is, and you know that the questions you want to ask can't possibly be processed and answered in that time, well, then it's best to not ask that question because you otherwise set this person up to fail. And it can be in this setting of the exquisite nature of some of these conversations. That's just not that can actually be hurtful. Opening these big vulnerable zones with folks and not being able to stick around to kind of help close up those holes, then in some ways you can actually hurt someone. So check yourself. What's possible within the context of that setting in that time period. But you can say, of course, things like, hey, we won't be able to get to it today and necessarily, but I do want to plant a seed. There's something I would love to talk to you about at some point, and XYZ. Here are some things I'm seeing. Maybe we can marinate on it together, and then next time we see each other, we can pick it up. Or say, if you're surprised that it goes longer than you think, whatever else, you say, hey, I've got to go now. Are you feeling okay? Is there someone around that are you feeling steady, or is there someone around you can talk to? Are you alone? Make sure they're safe and okay, and simply say, I have to run now, but let's pick this up. I'll shoot you a note. I'll give you a call when I can, or we'll kick it to the next appointment, whatever it is. But make sure to explicitly sort of come up with the next step or two so they can bank on when they can pick up this conversation again, rather than just be this open-ended into the ether thing. So that's, I think, if I'm hearing your question correctly, I think that's the way to manage the clock and to be realistic. So there you go. Otherwise, I'm going to start repeating myself, but hopefully that's helpful.
I think for that question, also what it sets in my mind is situations that may be a little more difficult, like someone is at the end of their life and has a relationship with someone else, and that someone else may want to talk to them about something difficult, something about regret or old hurts that haven't been resolved, but you know
Mm-hmm.
that this person may be actively dying or in a position where they can't really resolve the whole situation. What are your thoughts on bringing up those difficult subjects,
Mm.
knowing that that person may not be able to get to it?
Well, if the clock ticking is not just the appointment time, um, if it's the time left in the person's life, well then, boy, it's you gotta check your audience. So it's very common if someone's in the final hours and days of life, no matter what medications are on, it's very common in the terminal throes of an illness that the person would not be awake much of the time, and when they are awake, they may be delirious. That's very common. So know your audience. If you know this person to be thinking pretty clearly, if you know this person to have these issues are important to them being the dying person, if that's already established, then it may be okay to simply say, encourage other family members or whatever else to reach out and simply contextualize it and simply say, we may not ever get a chance to talk all this out, but while we have each other, I'd sure like to say X, Y, or Z, or I'd sure like to ask you X, Y, or Z. I'm not sure there are answers to these questions, but while we have each other, I just thought I'd bring it up, you know? But you need to really exquisitely read your audience. The dying person, whether from fatigue or delirium or whatever else, just may not be able to muster the energy. So constantly checking in with the person. Is it okay to talk about this? Are you up for this? Or maybe we can think about it another time, if ever, and not force it just because the clock is ticking. Don't feel like you should force this because forcing unresolvable issues can just throw confusion into an already complicated mix. So there's not an easy answer, but to check your audience, figure out what's possible, and really just ask permission. Ask, is it okay to talk about this? Do you want to go there? But again, in the final days of life, it's not likely that someone can dig into a big meaty topic, no matter what meds they're on, etc. So check your audience, be realistic, ask permission, give it a try, and just know for your own sake and theirs that you may not get an answer. It may not be a tidy bow waiting for you. But if it's something to get off your chest out of respect for them, not for your own desire to unload, but out of respect for what they can handle, if that's your motivation, then I think you're generally fine.
Okay, last question. What do you think about the practice of setting aside your ego and being vulnerable as a way to indicate that you're a safe person to have scary conversations without insisting on having the conversation or having the answers?
So I take that question, these are great questions. I take that question to mean, when is it appropriate or useful to self-disclose is the phrase we use in clinical work. When we, the clinician, the caregiver, bring our own, not just there for the person's issues, but we bring our own stuff into the mix. For me, as a disabled person, as an amputee, that's often in the mix with my patients and families. But it's also often in the mix in a way that I don't need to talk about. It's just obvious. And sometimes it's discussed and sometimes it's not. So I think of it really as an advantage in this way that I automatically self-disclose without the need for any words. And I do believe, underlying your question, there's a thesis in here that us, we on the caregiving side, professional or personal, um, that sharing ourselves with someone can be a very kind and therapeutic thing to do and can set the groundwork for trust. After all, this person, ostensibly is vulnerable, in pain of some kind, things happening outside their control. They're ostensibly the more vulnerable ones. And so if you can sort of perforate the line between the two of you and share being the facts of being a frail human being, a fellow human being with someone, then that is often a beautiful way to establish trust and to level the playing field. Here, as always, though, it needs to be really about that person. So if you're self-disclosing because you're seeking counsel or help, or you just want your story in the mix somehow, I mean, check your motivations. That may not be a good enough reason to self-disclose. It may interrupt whatever they need to be working on. And again, the person, the patient, ultimately in general needs to be the person of deference. We need that, their experience needs to be the tip of our spear together. So, yeah, but I do, underlying your question, yes, self-disclosing, sharing our own vulnerabilities can be a beautiful way to establish trust and open a door for that person to do likewise with you. And then it's a real exchange. Just so here as ever, check your motivations, check your audience. Can they hear it? Do they want to hear it? Will it register with them as vulnerability, where you just will just register that you're competing for attention or something like that? So here again, beautiful, interesting, complicated question. But so I'm speaking some generic terms, and hopefully there's an answer for you somewhere in there. All these things are very, very case dependent and relationship dependent, the dynamic between you dependent. Um, so there you go. Those are my answers to these beautiful questions. Thank you so, so much. Sonia, anything more, or did you hear more in that question that we didn't talk about?
No, I think that gets at it. Thank you so much, BJ.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.